All right, this video we're going to go over installing and configuring, not installing, configuring a DNS server on Alma 9. We're going to do that using some sample files I'm going to provide. DNS is already installed. That's not the command I wanted. DNS is already installed on our pre-built VM. If you needed to install it, the command to install it would be DNF install bind chroot. Chroot would install it, but it's already installed on this system, so we don't need to install it. The sample files are at this link. You can use wget to download those, and once they come down, they're in this tgz file, so we need to extract those files, which hopefully you remember from Linux class how to do that. tar xvzf, x meaning extract, v meaning verbose output, z meaning it is gzipped, and f to specify the file name. And once we do that, we have a directory called named sample files, so we'll cd into that directory to get started. So a couple things to note that you may or may not have already noticed. I'm operating as root right now. A lot of the things we need to do need root access, and I unfortunately hate using sudo to do every command. So if I'm doing things that need to be root all the time, I just become root, and the way I do that, sudo-i will make you root. If you want, you can just put sudo in front of all the commands I'm doing, and that will work as well. So in order to have a working DNS server, we need to configure DNS, we need to define our zones, and we need to point the DNS configuration at our zones. So if we look at the sample files we have four files. We have a named.conf-sample zones. If we look at that file, this has some sample zone definitions in there. We need to get those updated to match our information, and we need to get those entries into the named.conf file. We have two zone files. We have a f lastname.lab.zone, which will be your first initial last name. So this defines the information that defines the records for your zone. So that's where we'll make the updates to actually set up your zone. And then we have a student xx.lab.zone. And this is going to be for your external domain, where you need to put your external IP addresses. And then we have one more file, the 1.1.10.n adder ARPA file. This is used for reverse lookups. So a reverse lookup is when you put in the IP address and it gives you a name back. So in this case, we have a reverse lookup zone for f lastname.lab, and we have it for 6 IP addresses. So the way this works, this is the last octet of the IP address, and the IP address here is written backwards in the zone definition. So this would be for 10.1.1.1. So we're going to create a record in here for our server later on. So that's a brief overview of what we need to do. I'm going to edit my zone files first, and I'm going to edit them in this directory I'm in now, which is under root, and then I'm going to copy them where they need to go. So first thing I'm going to do is move my files to have the right name. I'm going to do the public zone. No, I'm going to do the private zone first. Well, why don't I look and see what the lab sheet says you should do first? Private zone. We'll do the private zone first. So my private zone is first lastname.lab.zone, and for me that will become rlwell.lab.zone. All right, so now I'm going to edit that zone file, and I need to change everywhere in here that says f lastname.lab to rlwell.lab, and I need to make sure my records are correct for what I need to have for DNS. So we're going to use a little vim feature to kind of do a sed-like command to do all these substitutions, because I'm not going to go change it a bunch of times. And the way we do that is we hit the escape key and you hit colon, and then you can specify some vim commands if you remember. So 1, $, means from the first line to the last line. We want to substitute anywhere we see anywhere we see f F last name, we want to substitute Elwell. And we want to do that globally, which means if there's more than one entry on a line, we want to do all of them. So if I hit this button, hit enter, it should change all my F last names to R Elwell. So that took care of that. And the other thing we need to do is make sure that our records are correct. So essentially we have a www CNAME, which is an alias that points to server 1. Server 1 is an A record for 10.1.1.130. So that is actually correct for what your IP address should be. If your Linux server is something other than 10.1.1.130, your VLAN 3 Linux server, you should probably go change it to 10.1.1.130 because that's what the instructions said for you to do. We also need our DNS record to accurately reflect what our DNS server is. Some of these other records are in there just for fun, like mail. We're not actually doing mail, but I have the mail records in there. And then server 2, we don't have a server 2 right now, but we can leave that record in there. So that's what we need to do for that zone file. I'm going to do the similar process for my student XX to make a student 99. So in this case, similar command, substitute student XX for student 99 globally. Then I need to change my records to match what my NAT is going to be. My NAT is 10, so I'm going to put 10 on the ones that might matter. So the ones that might matter are the DNS record and the server record. And you should use whatever your NAT entry is for your public NAT. So that takes care of that. And now for the inadd or ARPR file, I don't need to actually make a copy of that. I should edit this one. And again, we need to change F last name to RLL, or you need to use your first initial last name and change those all. So these are some sample records for things that don't actually exist. DNS1, we can change that to 130 because that's actually the IP address we're going to have on our DNS server. And then we want to create another record. Actually, we're not going to change that to 130 because we want 130 to work for www. So we're going to come up with a record that works for www.rll.lab with 10.1.1.130. So I just changed that DNS record. You could also just copy it and paste it and make a new record. So that takes care of my zone files. The main named config file, let's actually edit our sample named data. So same thing here. I need to change these. You could do the same sed command, but I'm going to do it differently this time. I'm going to do CW for change word and type rll.lab, and then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to hit the period because that repeats my last action. Bam. So in this case, this is faster than doing the sed command, probably the sed-like command. Same thing. I did CW for change word. I was on the first X, and then I typed in my number. I'm gonna hit the dot to change that, and then I do not need to change my add our ARPR file. So basically, what I did was I changed my zone name to match, and I changed my file location to match where the file is going to be. So this says the file is var named data. You could change this to put the files pretty much anywhere you want, I think. But we're going to put them in var named data. So now that I have this in my sample named files, let's go ahead and do two things. We need to edit the named.conf file, and we need to get our zone files in the proper place. So I'm going to copy my zone files to the proper place first. I'm going to copy star.zone, star zone to var named data. And I'm going to copy my reverse lookup zone to var named data. And then I'm just going to be a little paranoid and make sure everything's over there. var named data. So yeah, so I have files over where they're supposed to be. So the next thing I need to do is edit my named.conf file. It's in Etsy. And I need to get those zone definitions into the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to right above this dot zone, and I'm going to use a special Vim feature character set. What am I saying? A Vim command that will let me read in a file. So if I do :R and then specify the file I want to read in, and if you can't remember the file, you can, in another window, go look at the files to find the path. So it's in named sample files. So I want to put root named sample files, and then I want to get the named.conf sample file. So the file I want to read is going to be root name, and you can use tab complete here. Named sample files and named sample files dot zones, named.conf sample zones, and that's going to read this contents and put it in my file. Did you see that? That was pretty cool. So I just read that in. I'm going to adjust my spacing because I'm a little OCD sometimes, so I have a space above that one. I have too many spaces here. Unimportant, but it bothers me. So now I have these zones defined in my named.conf. I have my zone files in the proper location. So now in theory, if I restart or start, if I start named, hopefully it'll start. And now if I do NS lookups, for my, let me get this at the top of the screen. If I do NS lookups for my domain names, it should work. So that worked for my private domain, and then my 10.1.1.130. So before I enter, the first thing I did was I defined the server I wanted to use as localhost. So that gave back my domain name. So the server is working. However, that's locally. We need to test this from outside the system. So I'm going to use a Windows system to test test the system, and from the outside I need to put the IP address of the server, and then I can look up a record rll.lab, and that's not working. We don't have the firewall running, which hopefully you remember. The system does not have our firewall on. That'd be the first thing I would check if the firewall was on. If we remember back to our transport layer days, we should remember that we can see what's listening, and hopefully you remember UDP listens on DNS listens on UDP port 53. So if we run this SS command to see what sockets are listening, and we remember our things we learned from the transport layer, port 53 is only listening on localhost. So there is a setting in the named.conf file that tells it what to listen on. Up here at the top, it says listen on port 53, and in this case it only has the localhost address. We could go out and put the real address at the end of this, but we're going to change this to any. Be like, hey, listen on any address. So if we do that, we need to restart named, and now we can go back to our Windows system for testing. And that time it worked. So if we do www.student99.lab, that worked, and 10.1.1.130. Query refused. That's weird. Yes, we don't know why it refused the one query but not the others. So let's go look, let's see if we can fix that. Oh, so yeah, so our zone entry doesn't have an allow query, right? And the default up here says allow query only from localhost. So down here on this in add or ARPA line zone, we need to add a add query line, allow query line, restart named, and now we can go see if it works. Oh, that's not what I wanted. All right, so we fixed that by adding the allow query. So at this point, your DNS server is working. What you should do is you should change your DNS server on your Windows network settings to use your DNS server for DNS. You could either go change your DHCP config, or you could just set it manually. And then you should move on to the next step of the lab, which is to do some queries like I just did and capture that traffic with Wireshark. So there's one more thing I'm going to point out before we end this video. Lots of times when you go to google.com, you just type google.com and not www. So with our setup right now, that did not give me an IP address. You see it looked up a name, no IP came back. So if we want that to work, we need to create an entry in our zone file. I'll do that for my RLWell. I'll do that for my RLWell zone just to demonstrate it. So basically we want to have a record, and instead of having an actual name, we want to just put the domain name. Right, this dot's important and there for a reason. So put your domain name .lab dot and have it have the same IP as your VLAN 3 server. Restart named, and then if we test that, now that gives us back an IP address. And you might be thinking, Rich, okay, it's not on the lab sheet that I need to do that. I can tell you, you might want to put those in both your zone files, because every semester I have students that are testing either this week or next week, and they're not typing the www part, and they said, my thing's not working. Why is my thing not working? And then I go over and I say, hey, it's not working because you're not typing www. We don't have a record for the naked domain name, if you will. So if you want to help yourself not have problems, you should go edit the two zone files to create a record for the bare domain.